James observed with increasing unease as Storm, their typically gentle German shepherd, took his position beside the baby's crib once more as evening descended on their humble home. The same pattern repeated itself as it had every night for the last 2 weeks. Storm's ears angled sharply forward, his stance became rigid, and a deep, steady growl emanated from his chest. "I can't make sense of it," James murmured to his wife, Margaret, who stood leaning against the doorway of the nursery. Storm had been a beloved member of their family for 5 years, ever since they brought him home from the animal shelter. He had always been remarkably gentle, especially around the neighborhood kids who would eagerly pause to pet him during their evening strolls. When they brought baby Oliver home from the hospital 3 months ago, Storm had been nothing but protective and gentle. He would lay quietly beside the crib during afternoon naps, his tail wagging softly whenever Oliver made a sound. But something changed 2 weeks ago, and now every night like clockwork, Storm would stand guard and growl. The spring evenings were getting warmer, and James had thoroughly checked the nursery each time. The windows were securely latched, the screens intact, and there were no signs of any unwelcome visitors like mice or squirrels. Still, Storm's behavior persisted, always focused on the same corner of the room, even when Oliver was sleeping peacefully. Margaret had suggested taking Storm to the veterinary clinic for a checkup, wondering if he might be experiencing discomfort or anxiety that made him act this way. The examination revealed nothing unusual. Storm was in perfect health for a dog his age. The veterinarian explained that dogs sometimes react to changes in their environment that humans can't detect, like subtle sounds or shifts in air pressure. James spent hours observing Storm's behavior, noting how the dog's growling wasn't aggressive or threatening. It seemed more like a warning, similar to how he acted when he heard unusual noises outside. Storm never showed any aggression toward Oliver. In fact, he positioned himself as if trying to guard the baby from something in that corner of the room. "Maybe we should have someone check the house," Margaret suggested one evening, her voice thoughtful after yet another episode of Storm's strange behavior. "Remember last fall when he wouldn't stop scratching at the kitchen wall? It turned out there was a leaking pipe inside." She had a point. Storm's instincts had proven reliable before. The next day, James noticed something that made him pause. While changing Oliver's diaper, he felt a slight draft near the corner, where Storm always focused his attention. It was barely noticeable, but it made the baby mobile twirl ever so slightly. Could this be what was bothering Storm? Dogs were known to be sensitive to such things, and with their acute hearing, they could detect sounds far beyond human perception. As James prepared for bed that night, watching Storm maintain his vigilant position by the crib, he made a decision. Tomorrow morning, he would call a home inspector to thoroughly examine the nursery. Something was clearly amiss, and if Storm was trying to warn them, James was determined to find out what it was. He reached down to pat Storm's head, receiving a brief tail wag in response, though the dog's eyes never left that corner. "Good boy," James whispered, grateful for his loyal companion's dedication to protecting their family. Whatever was causing Storm's concern, they would get to the bottom of it, not just for their peace of mind, but for Oliver's safety and Storm's comfort as well. The mystery would soon be solved, but for tonight, James took comfort in knowing that their faithful guardian was watching over their son with such unwavering devotion. After all, dogs often sense things long before humans could perceive them, and Storm had earned their trust many times over. The next morning, James wasted no time and called the home inspection service as soon as they opened. The soonest appointment they could offer was 3 days away, which felt agonizingly long given Storm's persistent behavior. Margaret proposed moving Oliver's crib into their bedroom for the time being, but James hesitated, concerned that it might only hide whatever issue Storm was trying so desperately to warn them about. Throughout the day, Storm's behavior followed a peculiar pattern that James hadn't noticed before. During morning hours, the dog seemed perfectly relaxed in the nursery, often napping in the patch of sunlight that streamed through the window. But as afternoon approached, his demeanor would gradually shift. By 4 p.m., Storm would begin pacing between the nursery door and that mysterious corner, his anxiety building as evening drew near. James worked from home that day, setting up his paperwork at the small desk near the nursery. He kept detailed notes about Storm's behavior, hoping to identify any triggers. The draft he'd noticed earlier seemed stronger during certain times, particularly when the afternoon sun heated the exterior wall. Being an older home, James reasoned it might have structural issues that became more pronounced with temperature changes. Margaret returned from her teaching job at the usual time, carrying a small notebook where she jotted down questions for the home inspector. She'd also spoken with their elderly neighbor, Margaret, who lived in the adjacent house for 40 years. Margaret mentioned that during the last big storm, she noticed water staining on her wall, the one that backed up to Oliver's nursery. That evening, as Storm took his customary position by the crib, James brought in a stepladder to examine the corner more closely. The dog watched intently, but didn't move from his post. Using a flashlight, James discovered hairline cracks in the ceiling paint, spreading like a web from the corner. When he pressed his hand against the wall, he could feel a slight vibration, barely noticeable, but definitely there. Oliver slept peacefully through it all, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. The baby mobile above his crib spun lazily in the draft, creating shifting shadows on the walls. James noticed that Storm's eyes tracked these shadows, but the dog's attention always returned to that corner, his growl deepening whenever the vibration seemed to intensify. Margaret spent that evening poring over possible explanations on her tablet, her voice hushed as she shared her thoughts with James. It could be anything: a loose pipe, structural settling, or even something electrical, she murmured. But what really worries me is why Storm only reacts at night. There must be something that shifts as the house cools down after sunset. They decided to take turns staying up to observe the situation. During James's watch around midnight, he noticed something odd. The slight draft had become more pronounced, and with it came a faint sound. Not quite a whistle, but a subtle rushing noise that seemed to emanate from within the wall. Storm's ears twitched at each new sound, his growl maintaining that same protective tone. James picked up Oliver, cradling him close as he walked the room's perimeter. When he neared the corner, Storm stood and moved with them, positioning himself between them and the wall. The dog's behavior wasn't aggressive. If anything, he seemed more protective than ever, determined to stay between his family and whatever he sensed behind that wall. As James gently placed Oliver back into his crib, a wave of gratitude washed over him for Storm's unwavering vigilance. Dogs had instincts and senses far beyond human comprehension, and it was clear Storm was trying to convey something significant. The home inspector's visit couldn't come soon enough, but until then James found solace in knowing their loyal companion was on watch. Storm's devotion to protecting Oliver was steadfast, a silent reassurance that they were not facing this mystery alone. That night, as James finally went to bed, leaving Storm at his self-appointed post, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of discovering something significant. Whatever it was, he was grateful they had Storm to alert them before it became a serious problem. Sometimes, James reflected, it took an animal's instincts to reveal what human senses might miss. The home inspector arrived promptly on Thursday morning, his sharp gaze immediately noting Storm's tense, watchful posture in the nursery. "Dogs are often better than any tool we use," he remarked, placing his equipment bag on the floor. "They can pick up on things our instruments might overlook, like the sound of water running through a pipe or wood straining under pressure." James explained Storm's behavior pattern, while Margaret held Oliver nearby. The inspector listened carefully, nodding as he began his examination. He started with basic measurements, checking the walls for plumb and the floors for level. When he reached the corner that concerned Storm, his level showed a slight but noticeable tilt. "This is interesting," the inspector mused, pressing his hand against the wall. He pulled out a moisture meter and ran it along the surface. The device's reading jumped significantly near the area Storm had been watching. "There's definitely elevated moisture in this section," he confirmed. "And look here." He pointed his flashlight at the baseboards, revealing a barely visible dark line. Storm stayed close during the entire inspection, his eyes never leaving the corner. When the inspector tapped the wall, the dog's ears pricked forward, and a low whine escaped his throat. The sound was different from his usual evening growls, more urgent, as if confirming that someone else finally noticed what he'd been trying to tell them. The inspection proceeded meticulously, each step revealing increasingly troubling findings. Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. The inspector identified significant water damage on the exterior brick, pointing to a failing gutter as the likely culprit. Instead of draining away during heavy rains, water had been infiltrating the wall cavity, slowly compromising the structure. The vibrations you've noticed, he explained, are probably from water moving through weakened materials, like loose bricks or deteriorating wood. It was clear that the issue had been developing for some time, and immediate repairs would be necessary to prevent further damage. The issue has been escalating due to the unusually wet spring, the inspector explained. During the day, the sun heats the wall, causing the trapped moisture to evaporate and rise. But in the evening, as temperatures drop, the moisture condenses and flows back down. That repeated movement is likely what your dog has been detecting. It's subtle, but their hearing is far more sensitive than ours. Margaret hugged Oliver closer, her face showing both relief at having an explanation and concern about the implications. The inspector carried on with his evaluation, capturing photographs and jotting down meticulous notes. He found that the issue had spread to the crawl space beneath, where moisture was starting to compromise the supportive structures. If this had remained undetected for a few more months, you could have faced significant structural problems, he warned solemnly. The water damage would have kept spreading, potentially jeopardizing the stability of this entire corner of the house. Your dog probably saved you from a much bigger problem, the inspector said with a nod of respect. James reached down to pat Storm, who had finally relaxed slightly now that others were acknowledging the threat he'd been detecting. The inspector recommended immediate repairs, emphasizing that the situation, while serious, could be fully resolved with proper attention. He provided them with a detailed report and referred them to several reputable contractors who could address both the external water issues and the internal damage. That evening, as they waited for the contractor estimates, Storm maintained his vigilant position by the crib, but there was a difference in his demeanor. His growls were softer, almost as if he knew help was finally coming. James and Margaret moved Oliver's crib to their room temporarily, following the inspector's advice until the repairs could be completed. As James watched Storm adjust to the new sleeping arrangement, following them to their bedroom with one last glance at the nursery corner, he felt overwhelming gratitude for his dog's persistence. Storm had detected a serious problem weeks before any human noticed, and his protective instincts had quite possibly prevented a dangerous situation from developing. The contractor began work the following week, and what they discovered made James's heart race. Upon opening the wall, they found that the water damage was far more extensive than the initial inspection had revealed. The wooden support beam running through that corner had rotted significantly, and portions of the wall cavity were filled with mold. The contractor explained that the vibrations Storm had been hearing were likely caused by the compromised beam shifting under the house's weight. "Your dog wasn't just warning you about water," the contractor said, shaking his head in amazement. "This beam could have given way without warning. These old houses sometimes hide their problems until it's too late." James watched as the workers carefully documented the damage, thinking about how many nights Storm had stood guard, sensing the danger that lurked behind that wall. Margaret took time off from teaching to oversee the repairs while James worked. She noticed how Storm's behavior changed as the work progressed. Instead of his anxious evening growling, he now watched the contractors intently, following them around as they replaced the damaged materials. The workers grew fond of their four-legged supervisor, amazed at how he would perk up whenever they approached the previously troublesome corner. The local veterinarian, who had initially examined Storm during their concerns, stopped by to check on him. She explained that dogs can detect subtle vibrations and sounds at frequencies far beyond human hearing. Storm wasn't merely perceiving the sound of the water or the creaking wood, she clarified. He was probably picking up on the overall instability of the structure itself. Dogs possess an extraordinary talent for noticing when something in their surroundings feels off. As the repairs continued, James and Margaret discovered that several other houses in their neighborhood had similar issues, though none had been caught as early as theirs. Their next-door neighbor, Margaret, had her house inspected after hearing about their experience and found similar water damage beginning in her walls. The contractor explained that the unusual weather patterns had affected many homes in the area. One evening, as James watched the sunset through the plastic sheeting that temporarily covered the nursery wall, he noticed Storm behaving differently. Instead of his usual alert stance and growling, the dog lay calmly on his bed, watching the workers clean up for the day. The visible relief in Storm's demeanor confirmed what James had suspected. Their faithful companion finally sensed that the danger was passing. The repairs took 2 weeks to complete, during which time Oliver continued sleeping in his parents' room. Storm adjusted to the temporary arrangement, though he would still make regular checks of the nursery, inspecting the contractor's progress with what seemed like approval. The workers joked that Storm was their most attentive quality control inspector. James often shared their story with other parents at the park, highlighting the value of observing their pets' behavior. "Animals perceive things beyond our awareness," he would say, as Storm played softly with Dan on their picnic blanket. "What seems like odd behavior might not be odd at all. They're trying to communicate something significant." The community veterinary clinic even asked James to share their experience at a pet owner's workshop, using Storm's story to illustrate how animals often detect household dangers before humans notice them. Margaret created a simple presentation, including photos of the wall damage and Storm's vigilant behavior, helping other families understand the importance of taking their pets' warnings seriously. As the repairs neared completion, James reflected on how close they had come to a potential disaster. If Storm hadn't been so persistent in his warnings, if they had dismissed his behavior as simple jealousy or anxiety, the outcome could have been very different. The contractor assured them that the new support beam and waterproofing measures would prevent any similar issues in the future. Storm was showered with praise and given extra treats during this period, though his greatest satisfaction appeared to come from quietly keeping an eye on Oliver throughout their daily activities. The nightly growling had entirely stopped, replaced by calm, restful naps near the freshly repaired wall. James often found himself pausing in the nursery doorway, grateful for the bond between his son and their perceptive protector. The day finally arrived to move Oliver's crib back into the fully repaired nursery. The walls had been repainted in the same soft yellow, the window frames freshly sealed, and new baseboards installed. The contractor had added extra waterproofing to the exterior walls and upgraded the gutter system to prevent any future water infiltration. Most importantly, the dangerous rotted beam had been replaced with a sturdy new support. James and Margaret watched nervously as Storm entered the restored room, both wondering how he would react. The dog walked his usual patrol route, nose working carefully along the baseboards, paying special attention to the corner that had concerned him for so many weeks. After a thorough inspection, Storm flopped down contentedly in his favorite spot by the window, offering no growls or signs of distress. His composed demeanor offered the ultimate reassurance they had been seeking. That evening, as they placed Oliver into his crib for the first time in weeks, the change was extraordinary. The room felt solid and secure, with no hint of the draft that had once stirred the baby mobile. Storm assumed his usual position near the crib, but instead of standing alert and growling, he dozed peacefully, lifting his head occasionally to check on Oliver before settling back down. Did you enjoy this story? What do you think about the bond between dogs and children? Can it exist, or is it too risky to leave them together? Let us know in the comments below. If you like the story, please subscribe to this channel and leave a like. This story teaches us that those who love us can really save our lives. Thank you so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.